I just missed it. I missed the closeness of an audience, of a live audience.
Not many people could scare Elvis Presley, but one man did, and he wasn't just a singer, he was a nightmare in disguise. When he crossed paths with this infamous figure, he didn't hold back, calling him pure evil. Who was Elvis talking about? Let's find out. Elvis encounters Charles Manson. The summer of 1969 in California was like a hub for all kinds of musical, cultural, and spiritual events. America was going through a transformation, and musicians were at the forefront of these changes. No place in America was more vibrant in the music scene than California in 1969. An unspoken truth was that life in California had two sides, or could be seen as two sides of the same coin. Hollywood also had its two sides. One side was filled with success, wealth, power, fashion, travel, health, and all the best things life could offer. The other side struggled to get by, living hand to mouth, right in front of those who had made it. In California in 1969, one influential rocker made a comeback after being held back by movie contracts. Just a year before, without any warning, the leather-clad Greek god had made his return by appearing in a TV special. This musically talented icon was none other than Elvis Aaron Presley. To even mention Charles Manson and Elvis Presley in the same story is both shocking and fascinating. In human history, it's hard to find two people who are more opposite. Despite their notoriety, the complete story of what really happened in 1969 regarding Charles Manson and Elvis Presley has never been fully told. But fate has a strange way of bringing together people who would never have crossed paths otherwise. And this was the case here, as these men would meet, and their lives, including their own, would be changed forever. In California in 1969, Charles Manson was found on Elvis Presley's property. The reasons for his presence, how he got there, and what he intended to do remain uncertain. The truth is, Manson was there without an invitation, before his name, face, and actions would horrify the entire nation. When he was discovered on Elvis's land, he reportedly shouted the names of people who were well known in Hollywood's music scene. Amidst his outbursts of profanity, he claimed to be a singer and musician himself. At one point, he insisted that he had lived there before, meaning in the house and on the property. As was the norm, when fans or others were found on the property without permission, they were removed and told not to return. This was exactly what happened when Charles Manson was found on Elvis Presley's property. In 1969, Elvis was married for the first time in his life to the stunning Priscilla, a union that began on the 1st of May, 1967. 9 months after their wedding on the 1st of February, 1968, their daughter Lisa Marie Presley was born. At the age of 34, Elvis now had a wife, a daughter, and responsibilities for those he loved dearly. For those who knew Elvis and worked for him, nothing was more crucial than ensuring the safety, whether at Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee, or in Bel Air, California, of Elvis and his cherished family. During the summer of 1969, many things were heating up, and it wasn't just because of the weather. There was a noticeable tension growing. Emotions were running high across America as people, including children, were witnessing the confrontations of the civil rights movement and having to confront emotions, events, and rights that had been minimized for far too long. The Cold War was still going strong, having lasted for about 20 years, and tensions between communism and America were ongoing. Extremists like the Black Panthers were openly brandishing automatic weapons in the streets, and substance use was becoming a regular part of young Americans' lives. So many changes were happening so quickly that if someone paused to think, they could literally sense something different, something unfamiliar, something dangerous. It was in this societal cocktail that Charles Manson emerged, a man many described as captivating with incredible musical talent, who preyed on the hopes and fears of impressionable young adults. At that time, no one could have imagined that pure evil could arise from the passionate songs created, performed, and inspired by Charles Manson. Charles Manson was once a promising musician who discovered the influence he had by surrounding himself with beautiful women and seemingly having an endless supply of substance. He used his charm, along with his guitar and songs about society's problems, to draw in other young souls into his world, which was not defined by borders but by his words. While under the influence of acid, Manson promised happiness, community, and endless pleasure. Most importantly, he offered acceptance, peace, stability, and unconditional love. People from Texas showed up. Wealthy girls arrived. Cheerleaders came. Individuals from all backgrounds joined in. Under Manson's control and constant manipulation, all boundaries were erased. Manson aggressively distributed substances, always taking a lesser amount to maintain his full control. As their minds were being primed and changed by the chemical reactions from the substance flowing through their veins, Manson would invade their thoughts, their minds, and their subconscious with his beliefs and his never-ending stream of words, meant to draw them closer to him in every way. Time after time, Manson would quote the Bible, picking passages to support his interpretations, and he would tell his followers, the family, about the impending end of the world. Manson believed and conveyed to his family that he was the chosen one to guide his children after Armageddon. He would restart society, and his guidance would let the family partake in his greatness. Manson understood how to sway others, and he exploited the words in the Bible to push his twisted ideas. As a child, Elvis was taught about evil, the evil actions that some people commit and then seek forgiveness for, the evil that existed centuries ago and the evil that still exists today. Elvis absorbed these lessons from the Bible that his caring mother, Gladys, had given him. He carried this Bible with him throughout his youth, during his rise as a singing act, as a world-famous entertainer, as a young soldier in Germany throughout his movie career, and by 1969, he kept his Bible where he could access it most easily, on his nightstand. Almost every night he would open that Bible, underline passages, ponder, and softly repeat the words as he lay in bed, just loud enough to be barely heard. But Elvis did this because it helped him learn to comprehend. Charles Manson roamed around Hollywood and Los Angeles carrying his guitar along with a stash of substances and surrounded by attractive women who would do anything he asked, even engaging in public displays of affection right after he instructed them to. It didn't take long for Manson to find himself at parties with those emerging in the music scene. At one of these gatherings, Manson met Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys. A bond formed between them as Manson supplied Dennis with beautiful women. Dennis started boasting about how he would help Manson break into the music industry, telling him he would soon be a star. The early 1960s were a different time for Elvis. He had just come back from Germany after being honorably discharged from the army. His dear mother had passed away in August 1958. The woman he had hoped to marry before being drafted was now replaced in his heart by a young American girl, whose father was also in the military and stationed in Germany. He felt uncertain about his future, whether it would involve recording, live shows, or films. With Colonel Parker's guidance, Elvis agreed to make a few movies, which quickly turned into money-making machines, leaving him unable to pursue anything else because of his contract. Before long, one movie a year turned into 2, then 3, while the budgets shrank along with the quality of the scripts. The Beatles had taken over America, leaving Elvis to sometimes sing about doing the clam and other songs he really disliked, but he was professional enough to make the best of it. The years of struggling to meet his own career goals and standards were now replaced with critical acclaim and requests for live shows. 7 years of uncertainty vanished when Elvis made his comeback in the 1968 Singer, also known as the 68 Special or the Comeback Special. There was no question that in 1969, Elvis was the brightest star in California or even the whole world. Having been in prison before for forging a U.S. Treasury check, Manson learned important lessons during his time there. He believed that what one person told another was binding, and he lived by that principle. Manson expected others to stick to their words too, regardless of whatever situation they said it. He held people accountable for what they said, whether they realized it or not. If you spoke to Manson, he expected you to follow through on your words. Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys became fascinated with Manson and promised him a meeting with the manager, who happened to be the son of the famous actress Doris Day, of the musical group The Byrds, who were an up-and-coming rock band. Manson excitedly replied with just one word, "Cool," when he heard about this meeting. He understood the growing need to bring in money for the family. Manson thought that a musical contract could provide the income he needed while also giving him a platform to share his messages with others. Charles Manson had unique musical preferences during his childhood. However, in 1969, he thought that the Beatles had tuned into his vibes and words. Manson was convinced that the Beatles, through their songs, were directly responding to him. He shared this idea with every member of his family. The lyrics written and sung by Lennon and McCartney took on revised meanings for Manson. From what people know about Manson's musical preferences, he really disliked country music. Interestingly, he openly stated that he was a fan of Bing Crosby. He enjoyed many rock and roll artists, but claimed he wasn't a fan of Elvis Presley. It's unclear how being removed from Elvis's property affected Manson's feelings, but it likely didn't help his opinion of Elvis. Elvis Presley's encounter with Mason was just the beginning. What Elvis didn't know at the time was far more terrifying. He was actually on Manson's hit list. Let's find out more. Elvis Presley on Charles Mason's list. One night while Charlie was at Dennis's house, Dennis fulfilled his promise to meet with the manager of the Byrds, a guy named Terry Melcher, who happened to be the son of the famous actress Doris Day. Charlie played some of his original songs for Terry, and after a bit, Terry mentioned he needed to head home and asked for a ride. Charles Manson offered to take him, and Terry accepted. During the drive, Charlie kept chatting about his music, and when they arrived right in front of Terry's house, Charlie stopped the car and asked him if they had a deal. He was really asking if Terry would sign him to a contract. Terry replied that he was going to think it over. Terry got out of the car, said goodbye, and wished Charlie a good night. Charlie felt pretty down about not getting a contract right away, but still hoped Terry would come through in a few days. Before he shifted the car into gear, Charlie looked at the house and repeated the address to himself. He even said it out loud, just enough for him to hear, so he could remember it. In response to the request for live performances, Elvis had signed a deal to perform in Las Vegas, which was a big deal since it was his first live show in over 7 years. Rehearsals for the Vegas shows were going really well for Elvis. The musicians and orchestra he gathered for the shows were some of the best around. Elvis had already assembled his core group, which included drums, bass, lead guitar, piano, and more, along with a men's vocal group featuring J.D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet, and a women's vocal group called the Sweet Inspirations for backup. Plus, he had his friend Charlie Hodge, who he had known since his Army days, and who was also a talented musician, singer, and gospel artist. The rehearsals were coming to an end, and Elvis felt energized. He looked fantastic, felt fantastic, and his singing skills were among the best of his whole career. Elvis was back on top, and he had truly earned it, just like everything else in his life. There were plenty of good reasons to simply smile. When Mason got back to the ranch and shared the news about the meeting with the record manager, he was in a party mood. However, he was also worried about the financial crisis, since he needed money to support the family. In the following days, Manson kept calling Terry repeatedly but never managed to talk to him. He did the same with Dennis Wilson. Each call made Manson more frustrated, and finally, he got through to Dennis and asked about Terry. Manson was informed that Terry was not interested at the time. Manson yelled at Dennis over the phone and slammed it against the wall, shouting and asking Dennis if he knew who he was talking to. Manson then called some of his followers to join him. He grabbed his gun and ammo and headed straight to Dennis Wilson's house, banging on the front door and shouting for Wilson. When he found out Dennis wasn't home, he was asked if he had a message. Manson handed the man one bullet and said he should give it to Dennis, before storming off. Next, Manson drove to Terry's house, parked, and walked down the driveway. As he approached the swimming pool area, he was stopped and demanded to see Terry. The man there, who was taking pictures of a beautiful blonde in the pool, told Manson he didn't know any Terry. The Polanskis lived there. Manson was confused since he had driven Terry to this house not long ago. The photographer then escorted Manson off the property and back to his car. Manson got into the car and stared at the stunning house, the landscape, and the driveway, while Sharon Tate was being photographed. This was the second time Manson had been kicked off a property, and he vowed that it would never happen again. He promised to personally make sure that Armageddon would begin with the unaliving of those rich establishment people, and he planned to frame it on African Americans. Manson ordered the slaughter of the people living in the home where Terry resided. He intended to take various belongings from the victims and place them in African American neighborhoods to mislead the police into thinking the acts were committed by African Americans. Manson thought there would be a war between whites and African Americans, resulting in many deaths, and he believed he would be the chosen one to lead. He and the family would create a new social order with Charles Manson at the helm. However, Charles Manson created a list of individuals to be unalived and mutilated. To the outside world, these targets seemed random, but some were people Manson personally knew, others were acquaintances of his followers, and some were wealthy individuals like celebrities and entertainers. Manson and his followers referred to these individuals as piggies. Among those on the list, one name stood out to Manson for several reasons, the most significant being personal: Elvis Presley. When the newspapers broke the story, Hollywood was left in shock, horror, confusion, and fear, all wondering why it happened. As more details and images of the events emerged, the initial confusion turned into anger and a determination to capture the savages responsible for unaliving innocent people. Upon hearing about this, Elvis became even more furious when he found out that one of the victims was Jay Sebring. In Hollywood, Elvis had formed a friendship with a musician named Johnny Rivers, and they occasionally went motorcycle riding together. Johnny had recommended his hairstylist, Jay Sebring, to Elvis. As Charles Manson reveled in the knowledge that the second set of people had been unalived without him being caught, he understood that Armageddon had not yet come, making his list increasingly significant. Although Manson was not present during the first mission, he thought they were executed poorly. After learning the details, he decided to take action himself. He jumped the gate, entered the property, and tied up the couple, leaving the actual act to be carried out while he drove away, with the intent to commit more. At one point, Charles Manson, while filling up his gas tank, picked up a newspaper, which was typical since he wanted to check the news about his acts, and brought it back to the ranch. As he flipped through the different sections, Charles Manson grew increasingly bold about his achievements. But then his mood shifted. He slammed the newspaper down and shouted. When the family members gathered around, they saw the headline that read that Elvis Presley was back in Las Vegas and sold out. A few months later, Charles Manson and his family members would be arrested, with their faces broadcasted on TV and featured in newspapers all over the country. The shocking nature of their actions and beliefs created significant turmoil in America in 1969, affecting the residents of California that year and in the years that followed. Just a few months after the Charles Manson acts, Elvis Presley received threats against his life. A letter was sent to Colonel Parker warning that Elvis would be unalived. Another threat was made at the hotel where Elvis was performing. The colonel alerted the FBI and all necessary precautions were taken. Elvis confided in his friend from Memphis, Sonny West, expressing his fear of being shot for no reason. He even broke down in tears in the dressing room. He then called in Red and Jerry Schilling, who were part of the Memphis Mafia and Elvis's bodyguards, and told them that he had not done anything to anyone to deserve being shot. He hadn't harmed anyone. He also told them that if some jerk tried to unalive him, he wanted the guys to take care of the jerk, and he wanted it done properly. Elvis wouldn't want him hanging around like Charles Manson, grinning or claiming fame for unaliving Elvis Presley. It was unclear whether Charles Manson or any of his family members were directly connected to this threat. However, there was a chance that one of the members who chose to escape from Manson due to these acts had insider knowledge about who was on the list. This individual might have taken action to inform those on the list, either directly or indirectly. Following the acts, Elvis made efforts to acquire firearms in both Memphis and California. Due to a law in Tennessee that banned citizens from openly carrying guns, Elvis was designated as a special deputy and received a badge. This incident, related to the Charles Manson acts, fueled Elvis's interest in guns and police badges, eventually leading him to make an unannounced trip to Washington, D.C. to secure a federal narcotics badge from President Richard Nixon. Who exactly was Charles Manson, and how did he become capable of such evil? To understand that, we need to go back to where it all began. Let's take a closer look at the twisted life and crimes of Charles Manson, Charles Mason's criminal background. If there was ever someone meant to be a career criminal, it was definitely Charles Manson. His mother was a troubled teenager from Cincinnati, Ohio. There's uncertainty about who Manson's real father was, but he took the last name Manson from a man who married his mother while she was still expecting. The name on his birth certificate was Charles Mills Maddox, which came from his mother's maiden name. His mother spent his childhood going in and out of jail. She was a poor alcoholic, and Manson moved around between her relatives. He went to live with an aunt in Charleston, West Virginia, and then to another aunt's house in Indianapolis. By the time he was 10, Charles Manson was already out of control. He got caught breaking into a house and stealing a gun. At the age of 12, Manson was sent to a juvenile delinquent home in Terre Haute, Indiana. He escaped and managed to survive by living on the streets of Indianapolis. He then graduated from breaking and entering to stealing cars. By the time he turned 14, Charles Manson was sentenced to 5 years in a Nebraska prison for armed robbery. Manson had a tough time in prison. He was a small guy with a big chip on his shoulder. Even as an adult, Charles Manson was only 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 125 lbs. Much bigger inmates repeatedly abused tiny Manson. He developed a defense mechanism that would stick with him for life. Charles Manson pretended to be insane, and this act actually worked for him. Manson was released on parole in 1954 and relocated to Ohio. Before long, he was back to stealing cars and took one for a spin to Los Angeles. He made a living through thefts, break-ins, and robberies, but still found time to get a girl pregnant and marry her. Manson also figured out how to make some extra cash by pimping out his new wife. In 1956, Charles Manson found himself back in the federal prison system for another 5-year term. This time, he underwent a psychological evaluation and was labeled as aggressively antisocial. His IQ test in prison scored 119, while the national average is 100. The psychologists concluded that there was nothing insane about Charles Manson. In fact, he was quite intelligent. Manson managed to con his way into an early parole and was released by 1958, ready to practice a new trade he had learned from the pros in prison. Charles Manson started to build a harem and lived off the profits of prostitution. He realized it was much easier and safer to have others commit crimes for him. However, like many of his other criminal endeavors, Charles Manson got caught again when one of the girls betrayed him. Additionally, Manson had been kiting bad checks, which is a federal crime. He was back in prison in 1959, this time facing a 10-year sentence. Manson played the prison system to his advantage. He would act crazy when it suited him, but also took the opportunity to get some education. Another psychiatric evaluation noted Manson's tremendous drive to call attention to himself. By chance or design, Manson ended up sharing a cell with the notorious bank robber Alvin Karpis. It was Karpis who taught Charles Manson how to play the guitar. Manson picked up several more skills while in prison. He became a keen student of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Manson also delved into Scientology. His burning desire was to persuade people and gather large groups. Upon his release, he intended to use his musical talent, charm, and con-man skills to attract a female following. When you look at the Manson family from a neutral perspective, it's clear that Charles Manson didn't initially aim to create a cult. His main goal was to gain fame through music, and he needed an audience to catch the attention of a record label. Manson was intrigued by the success of the Beatles and their music, wanting to emulate their journey. The whole cult aspect was just an unintended result of his grand dreams of becoming a star. Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys picked up 2 of Manson's girls who were hitchhiking. Seeing them as an easy target, Wilson brought the girls back to his mansion in Los Angeles and took advantage of the situation. When the girls returned to the family and shared what happened, Charles Manson recognized a huge opportunity. He boldly decided to take 20 of his female followers and crash Wilson's house. Lured by the promise of endless pleasure, Dennis Wilson allowed the Manson family to stay until they overstayed their welcome a few months later. By that time, Manson and his followers had drained tens of thousands of dollars from Wilson and his friends. The connection with Wilson opened doors for Manson to meet big names like Neil Young, with whom he had several jam sessions. In the spring of 1969, Manson was stuck in his music career and losing control over his cult. Members were leaving, and recruiting new ones was tough since the counterculture movement had peaked. Manson wasn't focused on keeping men around, but he did everything he could to hold on to the women. They were essential to his survival. This strategy worked as long as he provided them with substance and made them feel important. Running a cult is no easy task. It requires a lot of resources and effort to maintain the illusion. Manson had to constantly elevate his game to keep control. He did this by preaching about helter-skelter, and it proved effective. At this point, Charles Manson had managed to persuade his devoted followers that he was a messiah, the Son of Man. He exploited their fears and aspirations by predicting a race war between blacks and whites, claiming that the blacks would eliminate all the whites and then turn to the Manson family for guidance. This was all nonsense, of course, and Manson was fully aware of it. Nevertheless, this helter-skelter idea served as a bonding agent for the family, and they bought into it. To buy some time while he chased other music opportunities, Charles Manson intensified his preaching efforts. He also increased his supply of substances. To fund this, they needed money, which put Manson in a tough spot. After leaving Dennis Wilson's place, Manson and the family started couch surfing, relying on anyone who would put up with them. One of the places they stayed was next to 3301 Waverly Drive in North Los Angeles, the home of Rosemary and Leno LaBianca. After that short stay, Manson discovered an old movie set called the Spawn Ranch. With this new location and its secluded setting, Manson gained more control over who came and went from the family. One of the new arrivals was a 21-year-old aspiring musician named Bobby Beausoleil. Charles Manson faced constant pressure to support his family financially. They needed money for substances, food, and vehicles. Most of their income came from prostitution, substance dealing, and petty theft, and they barely managed to get by. Charles Manson saw a chance and devised a plan for a big money heist. Manson decided to put his other family members to work by scouting locations and identifying potential victims to unalive. He knew he could persuade his most trusted followers who believed in his helter-skelter prophecies. Manson gathered them and announced that it was time to initiate helter-skelter. One major act wasn't enough for Manson. Once he identified a target, he would leave and the family members would carry out on unaliving people. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.